Welcome to the May 12th, 2021 Community Formation Commission. We are going to go to roll call. Mr. Ramirez?
Sure. Commissioner Damo Aramelekan?
Present.
Can't hear you, but I see that you're present.
Present, yeah, thanks.
Commissioner Alonso? See him online. Commissioner Chavez?
Present.
Commissioner Escobedo, chair is here. Commissioner Harris? Thought I saw you here earlier. Are you here at the end? Oh. Commissioner Harris is here, just still can't hear you. Commissioner Johnson, Kim Johnson?
Here.
Commissioner Rachel Johnson? Here.
Present.
Commissioner Killebrew? Here.
Here.
Commissioner Buxton, not. Commissioner O'Gorman,
Here. Present.
Commissioner Rodriguez, here.
Present.
Commissioner Sander,
Here.
and Vice Chair Zepeda.
Here.
And, excuse me, and alternates, Luis Reynaud,
Here, sir.
here, and Commissioner Louisa Wood.
Here.
Got it. Great. Go ahead, Chair Escobedo.
Thank you, Mr. Ramirez. Now we will move on to public comment that is unrelated to any of the items on our agenda. Mr. Ramirez, do we have any public commenters?
Just 1 second. Is there anyone wishing to speak on an item not in the agenda? Please click on the raise your hand feature icon. I believe there's no comments, Chair.
Okay. So the next item that we will be moving on to is consideration and action on our Community Formation Commission minutes for March 17th, 2021 and April 21st, 2021. Does anyone have any questions or changes that they'd like to make to the minutes? I'm not seeing any. So do we have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
Also move.
Moved by Commissioner O'Gorman. Do we have a second?
A second.
That second was from Commissioner Kim Johnson.
Yes.
Got it.
Any discussion? I'm not seeing any. So we can move on to a vote, Mr. Ramirez.
Okay, we'll take a voice vote. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
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 Against? Motion passes. Chair Escobedo, I see that somebody did have a question in the public comment portion, so I'd like to give them an opportunity to speak.
Absolutely.
Okay. Mr. Green, I see you have your hand raised. I will unmute yourself. You are unmuted. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry that you didn't allow me to speak on item 4B. I have a serious concern or complaint about the content of the minutes. I have expressed it somewhat in email to Mr. Ramirez and to, I believe I sent it to the chair and vice chair at their university addresses. The item V or 5 describes a item where you all arranged when the procedure for placing items on the future agenda. I do not believe that the statement is correct in the sense that it states that the agenda shall include a brief general description of each item of business to be transacted or discussed. I don't believe that the commission spoke to that. but that was a parenthetical inclusion by staff, providing what the minimum, in other words, the needs minimum, the D minus of agendas is only what is stated in 5. My concern is that the City Council and many of the other committees and commissions that have citizen participation do receive an agenda that includes the staff reports, the details in attachments, and a considerable amount of reading material so that one, as a citizen, can understand the topic and perhaps what you all as members of the commission have in front of you. So although you have voted without discussion on accepting the minutes for April 21st, I would ask that that be reopened and discussed, because I think the agenda should be much more comprehensive. A second aspect is that it's not clear where draft reports are disclosed. That's the last sentence in paragraph 5, or item 5. It does say that they are not to be publicly disclosed prior to the majority, and I understand that. But as soon as they are distributed to a majority, then I believe it is very appropriate to be placed either in the agenda portion or in the the commission's webpage. Thank you very much for allowing this comment, and please reconsider and discuss what I'm suggesting for how the agenda is to be prepared. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. There are no further comments, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ramirez. I do have a question for, this might be for Mr. Doimus.
One second, trying to get my camera on. Chair Escobedo, here I am. Yes.
Good evening.
Good evening to you.
For future meetings, when it comes to staff reports, is that something that the chair, myself and the vice chair are going to take care of in developing with a future facilitator, or is it something that yourself and Mr. Ramirez would help us with maybe Lieutenant Hill?
Absolutely. Any assistance you require, we will do. So getting the staff reports and making sure they're published. The idea was to publish them on the website, to do so for the public to have it a couple of days in advance is, I think, what the commission said last time. We'd be happy to facilitate that.
Okay. And do you have an update on a process for us to be able to share documents amongst commissioners, but also hopefully available to the public as well?
I don't know if Mr. Ramirez may know that. In terms of, we talked about just having a share folder for that to allow to, as you do your work studies, that we can set something up. Is that correct, Sam? We can create kind of a...
That is correct. The staff reports and any attachments are still on the website. So for the commission or members of the public, they're able to view anything that the commission gets. And trying to create a shared folder is what IT is currently working on.
That's great. That's great news. So as we get more information, we'll share that with the rest of the commission so that we all know what the process is for sharing documents amongst each other. Perfect. So before moving on to the next item, I just wanted to start by saying the training wheels are officially off, and now today marks the first meeting that we're actually going to make some decisions that are going to affect the ultimate outcome of the recommendation that we're going to give the city council. And I bring this up because in preparation for today's meeting, I rewatched our last meeting, and I noticed that some of us appear to feel less comfortable taking space than others in the meeting. And trust me, I get it. With the Brown Act, it can be rigid and awkward, and it's kind of hard to navigate these meetings sometimes. But I can assure you that myself, Vice Chair Cepeda, Mr. Doimus, and Mr. Ramirez will do our best to support procedure and meeting protocols. So for the commission, don't worry too much about that. We'll jump in and kind of guide when needed. And then on top of that, I know that the virtual environment, and especially this particular platform sometimes is not always the most conducive for chemistry. And I bring that up for all those reasons. It makes it that much more important for everyone to speak your mind, ask your questions, and create the space for others to do the same exact thing. And I think I don't have to tell you that this work is too important for us not to take advantage of the depth and breadth of knowledge and life experience on this commission. And I personally am so honored to be on this commission with you all. And to be brutally honest, we only get one shot at this. And so let's make sure that we get it right and we don't shy away from difficult discussions. So we should be rigorous in our deliberations, but gentle with each other as people. So I don't know about you, but I'm excited to get into the work and discuss some of the items today. But I also don't want to monopolize the microphone. So if anyone else wanted to jump in and say anything, I'll pause for a moment before moving on to the next item. Commissioner Rodriguez? You're muted.
This is a small request, but it's a detail that kind of bothers me when it's not correct. But on the online, when you look at the minutes online, the document is saved as living wage agenda for our minutes. So I just request that staff look at that, how that was saved, and then change the wording so that public knows that they're reading the right information.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you for that. Anyone else? Commissioner Sanders?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I wanted to say thank you, Commissioner Escobedo or Chair Escobedo, for that. I think I noticed the same thing, that it's a little difficult to take space in something like this, as well as it's oddly formal. Like, we call each other commissioners and there's rules. And I just kind of want to take that away a little bit and know that, like, hey, it's a first time for many of us, and that's okay. And it's okay to mess up, and like, we'll work through it as we talk through it. And I just want to kind of bring some humanness, compassion to that, so that we feel like it's okay to make mistakes, and as we navigate the rules of order and things like that. So I know, like, I know it's my first commission. I know it's many of yours first commission, and we'll be okay with that. Let's give each other some grace, and I think we can move forward well. Thank you.
Totally, I love that point. Anyone else? Awesome. So we'll move on to the next item, which is, let me read it. So we're going to receive a presentation from the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, also known as NACOL, and on the services, resources, and support that they provide to jurisdictions that are forming a civilian police oversight body. And we'll have the opportunity to possibly give staff direction. And to give this presentation, we are very honored to have Cameron McElhenney from NACOL to give this presentation. And so I will turn it over to her.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me this evening. And also, thanks for letting me be a part of the conversation that you just had. It's great to see a commission early in their work, making the statements about making sure everyone has space to speak, because it will help in the long run if everyone really is honest and upfront in the beginning. So it's great to hear you addressing that right away. So as was stated, my name is Cami McElhenney, and I am with the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. Next slide, please. So I just want to let you know just a little bit about myself. I've been with the organization since 1998. I started out as a member. I was a board member for Civilian Oversight Review Board in Indianapolis for 6 years. And one of the things that I learned during that time is how much I did not know. Most of the people from community come to civilian oversight without having a lot of knowledge about civilian oversight. And so one of my goals working with NACOL over the years has been to help give people the information they need to start things on the right foot, to make sure that they do things right the first time, or at least right the first time with the best practices and effective practices that they have at hand at that moment, and given state laws and all of those other things that you have to consider, but making sure that they can be successful, and also not always have to reinvent the wheel. There's enough hard work to do without having to also add that into the mix. So tonight I wanted to talk to you a little bit about NACOL, so you have a little bit more information about our organization, and then also talk to you a little bit about the work that we do for commissions like yourself who are looking to establish civilian oversight in your community. We also do work with cities who already have oversight, who are looking to enhance it, or just looking to know more to do their work better. So with that, if you could hit the next slide for me, please. So NACOL is an association that works to create a community of support for independent civilian oversight entities that seek to make their local law enforcement agencies, but also their jails and prisons, more transparent, accountable, and responsive to the communities they serve. So that's the mission that guides our work. Our membership is composed of oversight practitioners, community members, law enforcement, elected officials, journalists, academics, students, and others who might not fit into one of those previous categories, not only in the United States, but around the world. We have close to 3,000 members at this point that fit into all of those categories that I just mentioned. Next slide. So as our vision, NACOL wants professionally well-funded, properly authorized, and independent oversight. Oversight that's known to the public. Just as a side note, since June of last year, we've had a tremendous amount of contacts from cities and counties all over the country looking to establish oversight. And some of those calls were from people who live in cities who already had oversight and had no idea. So that is why that's on our list, because it's really important for people to know that these entities exist to help them, and that are there to do good work for the community. And we also want them to be supported not only by their communities, but their elected officials, and also be promoted by all of those entities. Also, NACOL continuously works to support civilian oversight on a national and international level, and also increase our strength as far as staffing numbers and financial resources and a public presence. We've been working, we're about 25 years old at this point, actually a little bit older than that, and so we've been working very hard to become more publicly prominent so people know where they can go when they need help. Also, as we vision, we look for law enforcement agencies that act constitutionally, without bias, and with respect for the public. We look for officers to be held accountable, but also seek input in developing and implementing policies, procedures, and training. Next slide, please. So NACOL looks to advance professional and ethical oversight and promote independence and authority. So we're not looking for civilian oversight that is just kind of window dressing. We want it to actually be able to do the job that it sets out to do in a community. So to do that, NACOL works with jurisdictions like yourselves who are considering and developing civilian oversight. We work to train, set professional and ethical standards for organizations. We look to educate and inform people relating to the field of civilian oversight. So not just all the people like yourselves, but also general community members, academics who are looking to know more about civilian oversight in general and what it might be able to do for their community. And lastly, we support efforts and strategies that afford civilian oversight organizations the independence, adequate authority, and sufficient funding and staffing. All of those things, which are not things I'll take your time and get into this evening, all of those things fall into what we consider the 13 principles for effective civilian oversight. Independence is number one on the list, but also making sure that they have the authority to carry out the mandate they've been asked to do, and also that they are provided the financial stability and consistency, as well as staffing they need to carry out the job. You know, often in times of crisis, civilian oversight is politically expedient. It's a great answer to a whole lot of problems, but it has to be funded and staffed properly so it can actually do its job in the long run. So all of those things are part of the process that we go through with cities who are looking to establish oversight so that they can make sure that all of those boxes are checked as they're making the recommendations. Next slide. So a little bit about NACOL. So we were established in 1995 and our founders are actually, most of them, former law enforcement. African-American law enforcement throughout the United States who saw that there was a need for civilian oversight. They, living in their communities, saw how they were treated differently in their own communities as compared to when they had a uniform on, and they decided that they needed to start doing something. At first, there was no NACOL. There was an international association instead, but they felt that the needs of the things that needed to be addressed with policing in the United States were different than other countries. And so they eventually formed their own organization. They started with 11 members in 1995, and now we've grown to over 3,000. So currently we're run by an 11-member board, all volunteers, all who work as if it was another job, who are from throughout the United States, and they're elected directly by our membership. We have an annual meeting that we conduct, regional meetings. Hopefully someday soon we'll be able to go back to the regional meetings. We do academic symposia and webinars as well. We try to have a variety of trainings so that we can reach as many people as possible with the information. And we also try to provide a mixture of free training and low-cost training with things like an annual conference where there's much more travel involved and higher registration fees because of the content that's available. We have changed some of our format this last year, just as everybody else has. Hence, we're all looking at each other in little boxes. Last year, our annual conference was all virtual, and we did 32 days of webinars that were recorded. So if you just didn't have 32 days in your schedule where you could watch a webinar, you could watch them at your leisure. And then this year, we're going to move to a hybrid where we're doing the 32 virtual webinars, but we're also having an in-person conference in Arizona in December so that we can continue the training and also provide something that is really important in the oversight community. I think that if you haven't already realized yet, you probably will realize soon that this is really hard work and it feels very isolating at times. We sometimes joke, although I realize it's no joking matter, that if you're doing your job really well, someone will always be mad at you. And so it is really nice to come together with all of the people of the country who are doing that same work. I would say it's almost like therapy for many. So we're going to institute that again this year with some safety protocols in mind so that people can have that gathering again and learn a few things at the same time. We also provide technical assistance and resources to jurisdictions who are looking to establish oversight or enhance their existing structures. And then we also work with the broader oversight community, and by that I mean community members who want to establish oversight, commissioners like yourself who are in the trenches working to establish it, practitioners and others. We work with them to connect people to other people who are doing the work. So for instance, if you're in a community and you really think that establishing a mediation program would be incredibly helpful, there's no need to start absolutely from scratch. There are cities who have them established. I can think of, 3 off the top of my head who have very different programs, but they're all very successful. So why not talk to all 3 of them and get some ideas about their mediation program so that you can see what might be the best fit for your city. So we do a lot of work just to help people find other people to be resources for them on very specific topics. Next slide. So when we're working on helping people develop oversight mechanisms, there's some things that we always keep in mind during that process. So it's really a process where we're guiding you through the process of establishing it. So, what's step 1, step 2? And I know some of you, I believe, have looked at, we have a guidebook on the website for establishing civilian oversight of law enforcement. And we actually did that for a project that we did with Mexico. And so there are some things that we've done along the way to kind of enhance it, particularly for the United States model and considerations. But it's a great, what do I do first? And when I'm talking about stakeholders, who am I talking about? So we like to guide people through that process. We provide training on effective practices. We provide examples of how practices are followed in other cities. We also do some work to review proposals to help look at them and say, maybe you want to also include this, or if you're talking about something like, for instance, the composition of a board. How are people going to be selected for the board? How are you going to make sure that the members of the community that need to be represented on this board are represented? Well, lots of cities have had to consider that, and there have been lots of cities who have had a lot of those hard discussions that you were talking about earlier. So we act as a resource by saying, okay, if you want to have something specific in the proposal about board composition, here are some examples of how other cities have handled it. Here are some of the problems that they've encountered as they've made these recommendations, so that you can make sure that the ending recommendations that you make are the ones that you feel most confident in. We also consult with task forces and resulting oversight entities on the next steps. So you put out your recommendations, council has approved an ordinance, and you're ready to go, and then what happens next? Now you've got staffing considerations and hiring process and training for a board, and so we're also there to kind of help provide some assistance with that. And then we also work with task forces and commissions to think strategically. And I want to talk a little bit more about that if we can go to the next slide. So by that, I mean, how can you as a commission build on opportunities while addressing and making sure that you understand the challenges of not only establishing civilian oversight, but of policing in your community, of issues of police community interactions? How will you build legitimacy with all of the stakeholders? Because you're going to need that legitimacy with all of them to be able to move forward effectively. And also, I should add the caveat, that's not a quick and easy process. So that's a long-term. Legitimacy was never built in a day. So it's a long-term process, and we can discuss with you how that might look. Also, really important to think about what are the really important issues today, and what can you kind of move to the back burner. Also, there's a lot of compromise involved in this process. So what are the things that are most important to include? And what are the things that can be in version 2.0, or what are some of the things that maybe there could be some more compromise or movement on? And then how can you adapt to conditions in order to achieve your mission? There might be conditions in the community that you need to adapt to. There might be conditions within your own commission that eventually, once everybody starts finding space to speak, you might find lots of issues within the commission and disagreement on issues that you need to figure out how to navigate so that you can carry out the ultimate mission of the commission. And so NACL can be there to help through some of those conversations. Next slide, please. So NACL is there really when you want it can be considered a neutral perspective. Although I won't lie to you, we're very pro oversight. We're very pro effective oversight, and we believe that those authorities that we think are effective should be included in oversight for it to be not only effective but also sustainable. However, when you're talking about oversight, particularly to those who might not see its benefit, like all of you do, you know, civilian oversight is a very quickly growing field. You know, at the end of 2019, we had 169 verified oversight agencies in the country. That's it, covering 18,000 law enforcement agencies. So not a whole lot. And those numbers, by the way, include those that are established through through ordinance, city charter. We're not talking about advisory boards who are maybe, you know, a sheriff has an advisory board with no powers, but they're there to counsel them on certain matters. Those weren't included in that number. So by the end of, or by the beginning of 2020, there had already been quite a few additional oversight entities that came online. So probably we had moved up to about 200. And then fast forward to June of last year, and we have, as I mentioned before, talked to over 130 jurisdictions at this point who are in some stage of the process of establishing civilian oversight. So the field is growing exponentially. Also, the capacity for training, professional development, guiding, and guidance we're basing that not only on our national network of practitioners. We know a lot of practitioners have put some very effective practices in place that we feel are worthy of sharing with everyone looking to establish oversight, but also our work as an organization. You know, we're in the midst of doing additional research on what practices are most effective. How many agents, for instance, how many oversight entities out there have subpoena power? And if they have them, how are they using it? And if they're using it, is it effective? Or do they have officers that come to because they've been subpoenaed and then sit in a room and say nothing? Like, all of those things are factors that we need to know more about. So we're also in the process of doing putting out more information on different aspects of civilian oversight, and so people can know more and feel more comfortable with what it's out there doing. Next slide, please. And I realized as that was turning, I forgot one more thing, is that, you know, when you're dealing with issues that have to do with policing, you know, there are some who say, well, we need to talk to the police and ask them about how they're doing it. You know, you go and get a police perspective. You might go get a labor perspective. You might get an elected official perspective. Well, there's also the civilian oversight perspective that probably should be looked at when you're talking about civilian oversight. So it's not that the others aren't valuable to the process as well, but the civilian oversight is very important as in addition. So what is the civilian oversight perspective? So, you know, NACL has a very thorough code of ethics that we ask all of our kind of it's a basement that we ask all of our practitioners out there to follow, because we expect to be to follow the same standards that we're asking police to follow. So we need to hold ourselves accountable. We need to have personal integrity, make sure that the oversight that we're doing is independent and thorough, transparent, and that we follow all rules of confidentiality, respectful and unbiased treatment for complainants, for everyone involved. That stakeholder outreach is being done so that you're not working in a vacuum. The agency self-examination is a norm, and that you have a commitment to your own policies so that you're making sure you're doing the best that you can. Professional excellence, and it can't be overstated, the primary obligation is to the community that you serve. I also, by the way, this is on our website, but I can send, after the meeting, I can send links to this, as well as, and I think I already shared this with you, Chair Escobedo, the 13 principles for effective civilian oversight of law enforcement. So I mentioned some of those earlier: independence, stakeholder outreach, community input, legitimacy, procedural justice are just a few of those, and I'm happy to share those with you as well, so that you can kind of have that basis for when you're forming the civilian oversight entity in Santa Barbara, so you kind of know what foundation you can build it on. But I must say that one of the most important parts of civilian oversight, because when I mentioned all of those civilian oversight entities that exist, one of the difficult things about our field is that none of those entities are exactly alike. So everybody, a lot of people come to us and they say, okay, what are the best practices? Well, it's very difficult to do measurement when no one is doing exactly the same thing and people are collecting all of their data slightly differently. But we, as I mentioned earlier, we do depend on the practices of oversight professionals and things that are being seen as effective to kind of build that body of effective practices. However, what we most look for when we work for any city to help them, or county, is that we want to help you create oversight that is right for Santa Barbara and not right for NACL necessarily, or not right for any other city. It has to be specific to the needs of your community. So we feel very strongly about that it has to take into consideration your community history, the people in your community and how they feel about the policing as it exists today, and how they envision it for the future. And then it also has to take into consideration the broader community. So that also includes law enforcement. That's community members, law enforcement, elected officials, everybody. And it has to take into consideration all of those pieces of the greater puzzle. So next slide, please. So with that, and this goes along that, this is a saying that some of you may be familiar with. It is based on the work done originally by Aboriginals in South Africa, working on disability rights issues. But actually, one of my favorite mentors, who is a community outreach specialist in oversight, also a community advocate in New Orleans, has this above her desk. And so every time I see her on Zoom, or anytime I'm thinking of the work that I'm doing, I think of this saying, because what you're doing is really not just for you. So if you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come to because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. Because nothing about us without us is for us. And I think that NACL really bases a lot of its work around that saying, and particularly when we're working with communities as they establish civilian oversight. So with that, I'm here for the duration for any questions. I am also, if you think of any questions afterwards, my contact information is here. I'm happy to help in any way that I can, and look forward to the prospect of working with you over the next year. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Ramirez, do we have anyone who wants to do public comment before we take questions from the commission?
Let me find out. Mr. Chair, is there anyone in the public that would like to speak on this? We have one comment. So let me unmute Mr. Green. Go ahead, Mr. Green, you are unmuted.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed the presentation and was able to actually go to their website while it was going on. The guidebook was copyrighted more than 5 years ago, and I'm a little concerned that it hasn't been updated. That's just an expression of thought. There were a number of programs that were pulled down on their homepage, but a number of them hadn't been filled in, regional programs and so forth. So either the website is out of date or something hasn't really occurred in the last 5 years. I have seen some statistics that say the percentage of people, of complaints that are raised that are settled with the complainant feeling satisfied is very low. I'm sure there's other statistics, and perhaps that would be appropriate to comment on. The last point was we used the expression professionals several times. These aren't professional lawyers, I don't think. They're not professional police people. What is a professional category? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Green. There are no other further comments or questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ramirez. So I will turn it over to the commission if you have any questions. Commissioner O'Gorman?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Cool. All right. First, thank you very much, Cameron. That was really interesting. And I don't have your, I looked at your website earlier today. I don't have it in front of me, but you know, one of the things that that I've been thinking about in terms of approaching this here, and I'm sure this is true in any state, there's different things. The extent to which you've worked in California, and also in particular, not just the Brown Act, but the Peace Officer Bill of Rights. In our jurisdiction, we have a Civil Service Commission that hears, personnel complaints, including from the police. So, to what extent have you worked with that? Because isn't that like the first layer to see like what you have, and then how to, because we're not just building on top of nothing, I guess.
Right, and California has a lot of things on which you must build. So we have a lot of people in our organization who do training, who work with entities who are actually in California, who are in oversight entities who have to, are guided by those same things that you talked about. One of the things that I mentioned in my initial conversations before this presentation was that NACOL suggests that there is also we don't act as attorneys. We don't act as experts in any one state's laws because they are all so different. Anything that's done really needs to be vetted by either an independent attorney or by your city attorney office, because they know the laws that govern your city better than others. I say independent because sometimes people go outside of the city if there tends to be some conflict there and they want a second opinion. But most cities do rely on their city attorney to provide that information so they know what the base is in which they can build. But NACOL also makes themselves familiar with each state's laws that guide the city, and local laws that guide the city that we're working with, so that we can know how to navigate those, but we definitely don't we want to make very clear that we're not the end legal opinion on any of them.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Alonso?
Hi, thank you so much, Cami, for the presentation and for joining us tonight. I was wondering, I think that there's like there's a responsibility to look at like the state as well as jurisdictions that are of similar size to our community. Your own principles kind of talk about how it needs to be like community driven and it needs to be like a good fit for the community. So I'm wondering like what your perspective is on modeling after cities in California that are similar size to Santa Barbara versus like Los Angeles or San Francisco or some of the bigger jurisdictions. And like if are we limiting ourselves by looking at only, you know, Sausalito, or are we is there potential for us to look at best practices from the bigger cities as well, the bigger municipal areas?
So there are two answers to that question, and it's a great one. So I think it's important to look at yourself compared. Actually, I would take three approaches. So first, look at yourself compared to similar sized cities in California, and then similar sized cities in the rest of the country. So that's step 1 and 2, because there may be things that are similar sized cities are doing in other jurisdictions that legally you could do that you might not see being done by anybody else in California. A lot of newer agencies right now are creating these hybrids where they're taking a little bit of this model and a little bit of this model and putting them together to create these really very strong entities that take care of the issues that are most important in their communities. The third approach I would take is I would never discount big agencies, because even if you're a small city, because there are things that they're doing that could be definitely scaled to your size. Even New York City, I mean, that's a beast of a police department in size. It is an enormous civilian oversight agency, but there are small practices that they do. Everything from creating a discipline matrix within their own agency as they review cases so that they can make sure that they're being consistent. Well, that's something any size oversight agency who looks at recommendations of discipline could do, whether you have 100,000 people in your, or a force of 100 or a force of 35,000 that you're looking at. So I wouldn't discount it because it is all scalable and you might be missing out on some things that might be very helpful to you.
Thank you. Commissioner Rodriguez?
Thank you for that presentation, and thank you for the resources that are available on the NACOL website. I mean, one could spend an entire week geeking out on all of the resources there. So thank you for providing that for free. Commissioner O'Gorman mentioned something that's a really good question. So if we have a commission like the Civil Service Commission that's reviewing personnel issues, if you would, how would a civilian oversight basically take anything that has to do with police out of that commission? Or, I mean, how would there be a representative from that commission on? Like, how would you do that? How would you marry that?
So there are cities that have married that pretty effectively, where they have different entities who are kind of in charge of different things. So there could be, for instance, the first one that comes to mind is Madison, Wisconsin. So in their new ordinance, Wisconsin, every city has a police and fire commission that essentially I think is very similar to what you're talking about. They implement discipline. It's also a review mechanism after discipline is implement or put handed down, and then it's also where all procedures and policies are finalized. So the civilian oversight entity is still going to do its job. They're doing an auditing function where they're going to go through policies and procedures and look at them and make recommendations also on training. They might pull out investigations to make sure randomly to make sure that they're all being done in a standard that is effective or following effective investigative procedures. And then they may also make recommendations on, they actually have the ability, I believe, to make recommendations on discipline and give that over to the Police and Fire Commission. There are also cities where you have, Chicago is sometimes a great example. I will say you see them, sometimes they're not a great example depending on the politics that are going on at the moment. But they have a police board who handles all HR issues. They have the civilian oversight police authority who does all of the investigations. And then they have an inspector general who does all of the auditing. So there are definitely pieces where they have carved pieces out, and they also, all of those entities hold each other accountable as well. Because sometimes the auditor, the inspector general will do audits of the COPA, the investigative authority, and of the police board to make sure that everything's being done fairly and consistently. So there definitely is a place for people to have different jobs in the process.
Interesting.
Any other questions from the commission? Commissioner Kim Johnson?
Hi, thank you again for the presentation. In your opinion, formation commissions who've done it right, who've been impactful, what have you seen them do? What sort of makes that happen? And then also in your opinion, and then also how have you seen those commissions effectively integrate the voices of the community?
Great question. So some of the things that we've seen, first of all, I would say education is maybe number one. So educating themselves, obviously, on all of the things that they need to know, but also educating those that are eventually going to vote on an ordinance or a city charter amendment, so that they have a clear understanding of what effective oversight should look like or could look like. And then also educating the community so that they know why you're making the decisions that you're making. I think some of the most effective commissions that we've seen have put out a lot of information throughout the process so that people know where they are in the process. What happens, whether it's a commission or an actual oversight entity, a lot of times one of the biggest missteps is that they work in silence, you know, and they expect that if people want to know, they'll come to a meeting. And so putting out regular information and making sure having community meetings if you can, so that people know and are updated as often as possible on where you are in the process. I think that also surveys are great. I think I mentioned this this kind of anecdote in our first conversation with the chair was, you know, we worked with the city who put out a great survey to the community to get feedback from them on what they wanted. They didn't put some things in place which made sure that everyone could only submit one survey from an IP address. And so they got a whole lot of really negative surveys from from the same people over and over again, which really skewed the results and made it not useful. But one thing that that same city did that I thought was fantastic is they had focus groups where they invited different groups within the community, people who they knew were disproportionately affected by policing, and then also people who were not, so that they could have a good mix of conversations. They had, I think, 11 different focus groups, and they made sure that there probably weren't any more than 10 people in each one of them. They were facilitated, they were asked the same questions so that afterwards it could be apples to apples in the comparisons of the information they received from each group. And it was really amazing information because they gave people time to talk. And having the small groups, I mean, as you know, there's some people who have very important things to say but don't feel comfortable getting up in a community meeting to say them. But a smaller group then allows them to do that. And when, like, for instance, there was a group that had a lot of people from the National Alliance for Mental Illness. And because they were with people who knew about the same issues they knew about, I think it made them more comfortable in speaking out and really having a really gentle, informative conversation. So that is one of the best methods I've seen to get true community feedback and also make people feel like they really have a voice in the process. Or just a voice in general.
And a follow-up on that is maybe facilitating some of those forums something that NACOL could help us with?
Yes, so when the forums I was talking about before, they didn't have a task force, essentially. They had a community advocacy group called the Advocates for Social Justice, who were the ones that did the original push for the entity. And they worked directly with the city to kind of sort out, the recommendations started up here. They were looking for a model very similar to Newark, New Jersey, or Oakland, and they kind of pared it down to fit their much smaller city. But the city worked with that group, with ASJ, to come up with the questions for each of the groups. And then the city and ASJ also thought of who are the communities and groups and organizations that we need to make sure that are at the table for these discussions. And so it was a nice partnership of the city and those outside of the city coming up with that. Then NACOL stepped in and provided the facilitators for each one of those. We had, I think, 4 or 5 facilitators who were able to kind of move around those groups, so that there was some consistency in them, along with the questions being asked consistently. So we are able to do that. But I think it's also better, that partnership of having someone maybe who is slightly disconnected from the community be facilitators, so it can be very neutral in that regard. But then also having you and members of the community involved in who is invited to those groups and what kind of questions are answered is very important.
Thank you. Other questions? I have another question. So oftentimes I think we try to look for the best model or something that's working really well. Are there examples that come to mind of well-intentioned efforts but ultimately fail because of just kind of not taking into consideration a certain aspect?
So I can tell you that when we see failure in civilian oversight, it's normally one of several things. So one is oversight that is created very quickly, and by quickly I mean, right after a major incident where political leaders are looking for something to fix the problem. And I don't know how many times I've seen a press conference after a police involved shooting where they've decided, the city has decided to implement oversight, and they say, well, if we just have a review board with subpoena power, it will fix everything. And I have to tell you, community involvement and subpoena power, very important. But there's a lot more to it, and it needs to be well thought out. So not having that time and thoughtfulness in the process to really decide what the effective practices and authorities are that need to be implemented is one way that something can fail. Another is not that I cannot stress how important that stakeholder outreach and community input is to the process, because those are, once an oversight entity is formed, that's the protection for the oversight, to make sure that when things are hard and budgets get cut, that the oversight entity is not going to just kind of fizzle away. They're going to be there to help it. If there's problems with it not getting the independence it needs or the authorities that it needs, those are the people who are going to fight for it. So it's really important. I think also one of the things that we found is that, and I will say that this isn't the most popular thing I always say, but I really do feel that it's true, is that involving law enforcement in the process so that it is being done with them and not to them can help. That doesn't mean that they necessarily need like a seat on a commission or even a seat on a review board. It just means that there has to be conversations. It can't be done in a vacuum away from law enforcement, because there are too many cities that have these amazing ordinances that they put in place, and then the first thing that happens is that a union sues them. And so then they're stuck in the midst of a lawsuit and unable to do the work that they've been working so hard towards. And then they lose momentum. The community becomes disenchanted with the process. So doing whatever you can ahead of time to make sure that everybody has a voice in the process, that you are thoughtful of, and it sounds like you already have, you know, that legal piece in mind about what you can and what base can you build this off of. It's going to be really important, because sometimes that isn't always where people start.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Alonso?
Yeah, so we're about to talk in our next agenda item about the timetable for crafting this recommendation to City Council. So I think for a lot of us, like, we're here at our third meeting, we have 9 meetings left to go, like the time is kind of ticking, there's a lot of work before us. Is that enough time in your opinion, 9 meetings plus like working groups, which we're also going to discuss tonight, to get a recommendation done? Should we request for additional time to get this done? Like, what is the average that you've seen?
So I will say first that it is enough time. Now, I've had people ask me if they could do it in 90 days, and I would say no, absolutely. But I think that you can do it in a year. A lot of it depends on, I will say we recently got done working with a task force in Athens, Georgia, who started out thinking, I think, that it was going to be a much shorter process. They also managed to start it a month before everything COVID began. So that drew it out a little bit, but they were able to put the recommendations together in a year regardless. I will say that probably towards the end, there may need to be more than once a month meetings to really iron out those recommendations. I would say probably in the last quarter. But the fact that you have these subcommittees that you're talking about, or work groups that are going to do some of the things between the full meeting will be very helpful. So I have hope for you that you can have something together by March of next year. I definitely don't think at this point I would suggest that you ask for more time. I think in the next 3 months you're going to know where you are and how fast things are moving.
Any other questions?
I'm sorry. I guess it also depends on once you all start being very open with each other and conversations start getting real, how well those go. That will also determine kind of the process. So.
And hopefully we're in a more in-person environment, so we can have a lot of those better conversations. Any other questions? So important to ask questions now, because after this, we're going to deliberations and asking the commission if we want to vote to direct the city to work out a deal with NACOL to so they can be our facilitators throughout this process. Commissioner O'Gorman, and then Vice Chair Cepeda.
I guess because I wasn't sure what action we were looking at, so is there a proposal on the table, or I mean, I guess maybe, I don't know that we can be that specific.
Yeah,
so budget or something.
So we've been assured, and Mr. Doimus, if you want to hop on at any moment if I get something wrong, feel free. But it seems that we do have a certain amount of money that we can spend without going through the RFP process, meaning that it is a much quicker process for us to get started working with NACOL, which if we choose to choose NACOL as a partner, any partner that we choose. And that's a positive sign, because that means that we can, rather than waiting for a few months, we can get started pretty soon thereafter. But I'll let Mr. Doimus take over if I got any of that wrong.
Chair Escobedo, you have it perfectly right. The only specifics I would add is that under 35,000 through the city administrator's authority, we can approve a contract. We recognize the timing, the urgency of trying to start with a facilitator to get the commission started with its work. So you have the ability after this presentation, we wanted to give that as part of the agenda item for the commission to deliberate and decide if they want to choose NACOL, because at least they presented. We know they're interested. The commission could vote to decide if they want to use their service, and then we staff will formulate a contract for them and start that process if the commission approves that tonight.
Vice Chair Cepeda, I know you had a question.
It's just a quick question. Thank you again for being here. So let's say a certain amount of time has already passed. How would we check in to see how the actual commission is running? And if it's not running as effectively as we had hoped, is there ways that we can like address it back to try to restructure it? And how, if that's been done in the past as well?
If I understand your question correctly, so I think that particularly given your time limits, that we would kind of do that assessment continually to make sure that you're on track. We wouldn't want to have months go by and then all of a sudden be like we need to start over. I think from what I've heard about the working groups that might be formed, I think that those are all things that are really important to the process and kind of the base decisions that need to be made. And I think once you have those, then I think creating some checklists of other items that are kind of, when I mentioned earlier about, you know, what is important right now and what can we put off till later. So there are definitely a few things that have to be done now, and I think and quickly, and then once those things are done, then things you can fill in between, the lines that go in between there. And I think that we'll be well adapted at being able to look and see where you are in both the big pieces and then the smaller pieces to see if you're still going, if you're on the right track, and as far as your timeline is concerned and the overall product at the end. I
I
hope
was
that answers your question.
let me clarify a little bit. The actual Oversight Commission, like once that has been set, and if we're reviewing it and we're seeing like, hey, it's not really working the way that we had implemented, and not creating the proposal that we had implemented, how can we go back and check on that? And then also maybe restructuring it once it's already been set. Because I know once it's already been set, it's less wiggle room to try to figure out to readjust things as it's already been created.
If I understand, Chair Zepeda, if I understand your question, this commission has been given a mandate for a year to make a recommendation to council. And so with that recommendation, council then would consider it and decide and vote whether to initiate that recommendation or not, or some modification thereof. At that point, the commission would cease to exist once this recommendation has been made. Let's say there, for example, is a commission that is created from the recommendation, and people don't feel it's working well. That's the process of public input and public comment and pointing that out, and maybe there's a reconsideration. But there isn't anything for this commission itself to do afterwards. After a recommendation is made, and let's say there is a civilian review actual type of commission, a body, that's what happens there. This commission doesn't have oversight or ability to review and check that based on what was given, the direction given by council for this creation of this commission.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
As a side note, I will add that there are some recommendations that then became ordinance or became actual oversight entities that included yearly reviews of the board, the staff, the process, and it was many layered reviews. So for instance, if you had, a good example is Denver. So they have a monitor in Denver, but they also have a very involved civilian review board. So every year the monitor is reviewed by the civilian review board. They're also reviewed by the director of public safety, and then also there's community reviews and surveys sent out to review the civilian review board and the monitor as well. So there are lots of ways that you can also make sure that there's constant input into the function so that you really know how people are feeling about how it's working, and then you always have the right people in place also to guide it.
Thank you for that. Other questions before we move into deliberation? Yes, Commissioner Chavez.
Hi, thank you, Cameron, first for your presentation. That was really great. Secondly, if we were to decide to go with your organization, NACOL, who would we be in contact with, or who would be our group facilitators? Would it be yourself? Would it be other people you work with? And would those people have experience specifically working either with California cities or cities like our own?
Great question. So I would be your main contact, but I also would come with a group, probably a fairly large group from California. The nice thing is you have more civilian oversight per capita than anywhere else in the country. So we would bring facilitators. We'd also bring trainers who do know California inside and out. But I would be the main contact, and for instance, at your regular meeting, I would be there, and if there was a question that needed more research to it, then that's one of the things that we do is go back, get that information for you, and then send it to the commission so that you have that information without having to wait until the next meeting.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Other questions?
Commissioner Kilbrew had a question.
Yes, Commissioner Kilbrew. Sorry.
Well, Commissioner Chavez kind of answered it, but I just wanted to refresh us on how you all will work with us again, just like what will engagement be, what is your ethos in terms of facilitating, and I'm just wanting to learn a little bit more because it's going to be very big on the relationship, and so I just want to learn a little bit more about your style.
Yes, so unfortunately starting out will be virtual, so that I realize stifles a relationship to start with. However, so the basics of the engagement will be that we will be part of your meetings. We'll be there to help facilitate as needed, and probably most importantly be there as a resource. So when there's questions, we are there to answer them for you. I know that there are probably some times that you're going to want to work to facilitation with the community, and then that is particularly in that instance. I'm a trainer. I can tell you all sorts of things about civilian oversight, but I have a group of people who are really good facilitators, particularly when it comes to community. That's what they do. Most of them work in civilian oversight, so they talk about the issues that might come up in those facilitations all the time. And we also have several who are trauma informed trainers, so they also have kind of that backing them up so that they know how to deal with a lot of the issues that will be brought up. I believe in, as I mentioned in the presentation, my thought is that this is your process and I'm here to help where I can and help guide you. Some of that happens on the front end where maybe I help you kind of establish some steps, but I also want to make sure that that conversation that follows is yours, and that I can interject where I think that it's helpful and where you think that it's needed. So, and then as we move along, my hope is that we can also do some in-person facilitation, or maybe be present as a resource at community meetings to help you through this process, because our ultimate goal is for you to be successful. And then, and as part of that, it would, I'm hoping that there's some in-person so that I can actually get to know you more than one by one on a square. And because I think that also helps as well. One other thing that we do like to do with the groups that we're working with is to do some time about challenges and opportunities and expectations, so that those conversations can be had at the front end, so that everybody knows where everybody's coming from. You know, when we were in working in Athens, you know, that was one of the first things that we did, and it was very helpful for the group to know that we had people with lived experience working with people who, a person who was ex-law enforcement, and having that, those conversations up front so everybody knew where everybody was coming from and had an understanding of perspective, really helped the process. That didn't mean that there wasn't confrontation. I mean, all of those meetings are available online if you'd like to witness any of those, but but having that perspective really, I think in the end, produced a really good end product for not only the commission, but for the community. And it's now in the hands of the city council, who's deciding whether or not they're going to implement all of those. But I think what the commission came put forth is something that they could be proud of.
Thank you. Other questions? Not seeing any. All right. Thank you so much, Cami. It was really great having you here. And I'm not sure if you're going to be around for the rest of the meeting, but if not, thank you so much.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure being with all of you and meeting you as much as I was able to. Would you like me to stay on for the deliberation, or would you like me to hop off and then come back for the working group discussion? I'm happy to do what's best.
You can definitely stay on. Yeah, if in deliberations questions come up, it would be helpful.
Okay, great.
Yeah. How do commissioners feel? Do we want to take a small break, stretch your legs before going into deliberations, or do we want to just knock this out? All right. I see Commissioner Rodriguez, knock it out. Okay, so deliberations, who wants to go first and kind of maybe just give input on, do we want to move forward? Do we have the option of, we could ask the city to move forward with contracting with NACOL. We could say, no, we think another partner might be good. We could also table this and invite someone else to come present. We can try and find another partner. I will say that we did, and maybe Mr. Ramirez can come on and talk about some of the groups that he tried to look at, but I know it was pretty tough finding a group that specialized in this particular work. So I did want to throw that out there, but we do have options if we don't feel like we're ready to make a decision today. So I'll open it up to anyone who wants to take a crack at it. I don't mind silence. Commissioner Alonso?
Yeah, so I hate silence, so I'll get us started off. I think that for me, and I don't know if the rest of you feel this way, I'd be really excited to hear your perspective on this, but I do feel like time is of the essence. There's a lot of urgency. We have assurance that we can get it done, but we need to like get the infrastructure in place to start moving on some of this. And so I think the urgency is a driving factor for me. And also, I think it is amazing that the state we live in has more oversight per capita, and yet at the same time, as I mentioned in the last meeting, fewer than 3.5% or fewer than 4% of municipalities, municipal entities in the state of California have civilian oversight. So that's nuts to me that we have the most per capita. Maybe just because there's some big cities in there, but I think that time is of the essence. I think we have like the mandate to start working on this, and I think NACOL is the experts in this field, and it would be ideal to have them as a partner to help facilitate and guide us through not only like what makes a good proposal, but like where has this failed right before, and what can we learn from that. They have this deep institutional knowledge on these proposals, and they track this kind of stuff. And as was already mentioned, there's kind of a lack of organizations that are focused on this work specifically, and hopefully that changes sometime in the future. But for now, I think that this is an ideal partner to move forward with. But thank you. That's all I had to say.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Wood?
Hi, I also would like to, I agree with Commissioner Alonso. I am nervous about the amount of time, even though a year does, or how many months we have left. I was excited to hear about how if we have questions, they're able to do that kind of research and really dive deep into that information that we may not have the time to or wherewithal to get. I think that I am comfortable moving forward with this partnership and excited about it.
Thank you. Other commissioners? Commissioner Sander, and then Kim Johnson.
Thank you. I agree with both of those commissioners. I think that not only was NACOL presentation informative, but I was pretty moved that Cami was able to list off what happened in different municipalities and jurisdictions and how they've adapted. I think that's information that we just don't have at the ready. and that alone is worth its weight in gold. So I think like what I am also excited about, and something that she brought up in her presentation, is I think as we've looked over just the current examples that we've seen of different kind of oversight commissions, that I think we're probably going to go with some sort of hybrid model, because that seems to be what and this is just my guess, but it seems to be what is mostly adaptable for your city. And I think having the kind of resource that NACOL could bring, that we could look at a lot of different and compare with what's been out there and kind of piece together something that really works for Santa Barbara, and having that kind of resource at the ready, I think would be really beneficial for us. So that being said, I'm willing to move forward with NACOL as a partner in this.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with what everyone said. Being someone who really likes to do research and kind of learn from the past and learn from history and learn from best practices, I think tapping into their knowledge base will really set us up for success. And to Commissioner Alonso's point about there not being that much, not many commissions sort of, within the state, I would love for this, for what the product that we end up creating being a blueprint for other cities. So, going into this process with a strong partner like NACOL, I think would help set us up for success and to be able to set a blueprint for how others proceed.
Thank you. Other commissioner deliberations?
I think Commissioner Chavez's hand is raised.
Oh, Commissioner Chavez. Sorry.
Thank you. Yes, I'm definitely in agreement with what everybody else has said. Back to Commissioner Alonso's point, I think time is definitely of the essence. And I want to thank you, Cami, for being so prepared today, and for basically being able to just, you're already ready for it. So I want to thank you for that. And that's definitely a big factor for myself, that you're already here, you're prepared. And again, we are a little bit pressed on time. So that's definitely a big factor for me. And I also appreciate that NACOL has dedicated their entire organization to this. So I really do respect your wealth of information. And so that's really big for me. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Adama-Lakin.
I just want to also thank you. I think, as everyone else has said, I support moving forward with it. And my main focus of concern was more of the outreach side, which I'm glad you spoke to, as far as connecting with law enforcement and getting them, making sure we're on the same page as them, and also getting buy-in from the community. I think that's like, it's a little reassuring it's very reassuring actually to have you speak to that, and to hopefully devise a way to make sure that transitions smoothly, because I think that could be an issue if we don't execute properly. So thank you.
Thank you. Deliberations from commissioners we haven't heard from yet. Commissioner O'Gorman.
Oh, well, I talked already and asked her a question. I guess the only thing I would, once we do go to vote, just kind of understand what it is we're asking, since we don't have a proposal in front of us. So is it just facilitation? That's all.
Yeah.
But I'm fine.
I believe the way that we would structure it is it would be hourly, and it would be kind of flexible. And Cami, feel free to jump in if your understanding was different, but it would be flexible. So attending meetings, being a resource for us, also being a resource for our working groups, which I think would be really important. And then as we get closer, providing feedback on things like if we decide to go the route of having a survey for the public, making sure that we're asking the right questions and taking care of those issues like one response per person versus someone being able to submit multiple responses. So having that guidance, I think, is kind of the role and the partnership that we would have with NACOL. Cami, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything else.
Yes, so that is spot on. The only thing I'll add is that we normally structure our contracts in a way that make them flexible, because we also realize that as you go through the work, most of the people that we work with don't know what they don't know yet. And so we want to make sure that we give you the ability to say, okay, so now that we're 5 months in, we may need to, particularly if we're talking about specific topics that we're going to, if there's training involved or facilitation of specific community groups, we want to make sure that we have enough flexibility in there that we can provide you what you actually need. So as the chair stated, it'll be an hourly up until a certain amount, and you may not need all of those hours, but we will be there to give you what you need.
And if I may add, Chair Escobedo, the motion would be to direct city staff to draft and enter a contract with NACOL with a do not exceed amount. So that amount would be $35,000, and within would contain a scope of work that would include all this, the facilitation, the assistance for workshops, everything else. So that would be the direction from the commission to us to draft a contract, and we'll have the hourly rate, and the contract will consist of a do not exceed amount based on the limitation we have currently. If the work becomes extensive down the road, we'll have time, we'll know that. And if we need to exceed an amount, we can always go to council at a later date to pass that $35,000 threshold.
Commissioner Kim Johnson?
Yeah, so building off of this conversation, it'd be great if we could get sort of like a menu of what NACOL can provide, because to the point of we don't know what we don't know, it would be great to know sort of the breadth of services that are available that we can tap into throughout the process.
So I can verbally address this now, and we'll definitely can put it in writing for you at some point. But starting off with helping you decide the immediate tasks, providing information, like for instance, the working groups. If one of those is working on models of oversight, providing you basic information on the models of oversight. And then also giving you the information you need if you want to do some additional research on your own. What are good examples of a review model? What are good examples of an investigative model or auditor model? How does that work in a hybrid format in some other cities? So providing information like that to the working groups so that they can be as productive as possible. I think also facilitating community facilitation, being available at community events as a resource, eventually hopefully being able to move into an in-person situation where we can send facilitators to those community meetings, to be a part of that. And then also reviewing the documents that are, the recommendations, the drafts, to say what other pieces are missing. If you're stumbling on a particular piece of the recommendation, providing information on how other cities are doing it. So the one thing that we don't, as I mentioned before, we would not provide is the legal advice. But other than that, if it's civilian oversight, we're here to be a resource for that. And then also, as I will say, we are, although we have a report coming out, and it's that is on the history, this current state of the field, and effective practices in civilian oversight that is about 3 years in the making. And it is a federally funded project that got held up. I'm sure you can all imagine why, until just recently. And so that should be coming out in a couple of weeks, actually. And so that will also be something that, whether you contract with us or not, will be also a pretty valuable piece of information. I know that the pre-publication summaries that we sent earlier, that I don't know if all of you have had a chance to see, that all came from that work, the 13 principles, the information on models and effective practices. So we'll also, any resource that we have, we'll make sure that you know about and have access to.
Thank you.
And I'm sure I can make that more concise in writing rather than rambling through the, the list. So I apologize.
Other commissioner deliberations from commissioners we haven't heard from yet?
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, Vice Chair.
Yeah, so I'm definitely for moving forward with NACOL. I also wanted to see if maybe being intentional about leaving a certain amount, or maybe going to City Council for asking for a larger amount for community members, if we're going to be asking them for their labor to come meet with us, like community advocates, just making sure that we have that as part of the budget as well. So like, for example, like if we reach out to like Healing Justice, if we reach out to like Freedom for Youth, whoever we're reaching out to, that we have that also set on the budget as well, so that they can be provided for their time and labor as well. But everything else, like, thank you so much for being here and for all this information. It's definitely needed and very appreciated.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And Mr. Doimus, that is possible, correct, for us to do?
In terms of arranging other like contracts for the future or agreements, yes, obviously we would need, if we're going to do it under the city administrator, we would go to him. If it's more, we would go to council. So it doesn't preclude this being the only resource for this commission to use, obviously.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Doimus.
You're welcome, Chair Escobedo.
Commissioner O'Gorman?
Yeah, if I could say, and I can make a motion, but just if we could possibly at least keep this motion and action to this group, just because of the clarity that I think we need in asking for a contract, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, if I understood correctly, I don't think that was going to be a part of the motion. It was just a suggestion.
Okay, well, that's why I'll make that motion then, that we direct staff, as Mr. Doimus articulated, to work with NACOL on developing a contract.
Do we have a second?
I believe Commissioner Killebrew had a question or a comment.
Commissioner Killebrew?
Yeah, I do have a comment, because normally it's just so funny, because normally I sit with proposals and I read them thoroughly and I'm just like all in it. And so this is a different process for me. I'm going to be completely honest. And so I understand that we need to definitely move forward in terms of time. I've researched NACOL quite a bit extensively, and so I trust their work. It just feels kind of like open. And so I, again, trust our city staff to work with them. And I'm in favor. I don't know if I can second after I talk, but happy to second. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I apologize, I'm missing some of the hands because on my computer, the name bar is blocking your hand. So if you put it a little bit higher. Okay, Commissioner Alonso, thank you.
I would just request from the chair and vice chair and city staff that for future conversations regarding contracts or proposals, that we have proposal in hand before the meeting to discuss and review the actual written proposal, because I imagine that'll be what we're going to do on the next agenda. But yeah, just it would be great to have the proposal ahead of time.
So I think that we can make that happen, right, Mr. Doimus?
Chair Escobedo, yes, we could. The vote would be for the city staff to facilitate an agreement on using the city administrator's authority. It'll have a scope of work, and once it's completed, we'll send that to the entire commission so they can see the exact contract. That's a public record, so the public would obviously be able to see that contract. For future instances, I know this was short notice. It came together very quickly. So if we do have something in mind where we want another group, we will make sure like a written proposal from them is put in advance for the commission to review. Obviously, so we can make that work in the future.
Thank you. Commissioner Rodriguez.
So for clarification, the motion is to direct city staff to draft a contract. And then I believe our next meeting, we will be able to review the contract, offer dialogue around it, and then vote to approve it. Is that correct?
Well, we would have to go to the motion. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Doimus.
Yeah, I was going to say the motion is just to Commissioner Rodriguez and Chair Escobedo. The motion is just to direct staff to enter a contract with NACOL where we retain their services. That we have a price per hour. What they would do, they would be a do not exceed amount. They would introduce some aspect of a scope of work, but they're pretty broad in terms of what they offer their services on for this issue. So you can use them quite liberally if you want this commission to their services. So in this case, the main things of an issue of the amount an hour and the do not exceed amount are the key things. Their scope of work is very wide, very broad of what they'll be able to do for you. So we want the commission to be able to freely use them. And so that's why in this instance, I don't see an issue. If we come back and vote on that contract, you're losing another month or two where we just want them starting the next meeting to just start their facilitation with you right away. So that was the original motion, at least, or my suggestion. No motion, I don't think, has been put on the floor yet, but to have staff finalize a contract with NACOL and to start the facilitation. And like I said, there'll be a do not exceed amount that we recognize currently. There'll be an hourly rate, but their scope of work is basically to engage the commission in facilitation as needed for you, the commission, to decide how you want to use them going forward.
Thank you for that clarification, Attorney Doimus. I agree with my fellow commissioners and in support of contracting with NACOL outside of an RFP process. That part makes me just a little bit nervous, as others has mentioned. But I also know that NACOL is a highly regarded organization and is a reputable resource for civilian oversight. So I feel confident in that. And echoing what several of my fellow commissioners mentioned, should we have another proposal or RFP or contract, I would feel more comfortable and I guess responsible to the public if we had an opportunity to review it before we kind of blindly vote on it. But with that said, I do agree and support this motion.
Thank you. Any discussion about the motion? Commissioner Kim Johnson?
Not sure if this is something we discuss now, but in thinking about this potentially being an hourly contract, is there going to be a discussion about how we come together to decide, who is the person who assigns work to their group, and how do we monitor how many hours we've used up? So I don't know if that's a discussion now or later, but at some point we probably should figure out what that process looks like in the accountability.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And Mr. Doimus, is that going to be a part of the negotiation, or is that something that we should discuss now?
I think if the commissioners feel strong about it, they certainly can advise and let us know now, or we enter and work with the chair and the vice chair in terms of that aspect of facilitating it. So it's up to the commission how they want to do that. It's very new in terms of the city, so I don't, how facilitation is going to work, how that's going to go, how direction is going to go from the commission to the facilitator on it. So the commission can feel free to choose what method they would want to do. If they want to have a discussion letting us know how they want to do that, or if they want to leave it up to appoint someone, a separate commissioner, or leave it up to the chair, vice chair, that's fine as well.
And to follow up on that, Commissioner Johnson asked about kind of the total dollar amount. And so that's something that staff can continue to provide on a monthly basis as we need, of how many hours have been, costed to our contract, so that you at least have an idea of how many hours have been billed to the city.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. So we have a motion on the table. Commissioner O'Gorman, did your motion sound? What's that?
Oh, I thought you were asking if I had another question. I don't, but.
You made a motion, and I just wanted to make sure that we get it right. Was it consistent with what Assistant City Attorney Doimus
That's exactly what I said. Yes,
Good.
to move forward as articulated by the City Attorney Doimus on contracting with NACOL for the purposes that we discussed here tonight.
Perfect. And that was seconded by Commissioner Killebrew. And any discussion on that from any commissioners we haven't heard from? I know Commissioner Renaud, Commissioner Harris, and Commissioner Rachel Johnson, we haven't heard how you feel about it. It's okay if you don't want to make any comments, but the floor is yours if you do. Yeah, Commissioner Rachel Johnson.
I appreciate you continuing to, yes, try to get us to speak. I mean, I'm in agreement with what all of my fellow commissioners have said so far. I mean, I was particularly compelled by kind of the idea of being able to use NACOL as a resource for some data and analytics. That's something I'm really interested in, and also sometimes the most time consuming of research projects. So I really appreciate that. And yeah, I'm fully supportive of moving forward. I think what Cami had mentioned earlier about sort of we don't know what we don't know, that's precisely what I've been taking notes on during her presentation, was things I want to pass along to the chair and vice chair for other presentations, I'd like to hear to learn more about the gaps in my own knowledge. So yeah, I'm fully supportive of moving forward. And really want to know, yes, at what date can we start sending requests to them?
We will let you know first thing. Commissioner Renaud?
Thanks, Commissioner Gabe. Appreciate Cam. I agree with all my colleagues. I think NACOL seems like a great organization, done a lot of the research, so there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. I'm sure we'll find out about all the contractual costs and all those things in a timely manner. I just had a question. We begin with the end in mind. I agree with Commissioner Sander about us probably going to get to a hybrid at some point in time. But my question is this: we've all watched what happened with, obviously in Minnesota and all over the country, and I know all of these cities have citizen review commissions or boards or different formats like that. And my question is, how effective do you think they are in their recommendations over internal affairs or professional standards when the discipline is issued out? And I see a lot of unfounded when the police are investigating their own. I don't know what you've seen, but I follow it kind of closely, and it just seems that are these commissions really that effective, or are they just not listening to their recommendations? Or, I mean, I just see a lot of unfoundeds when internal affairs does it. Just a question.
So it's a good one. So there are definitely issues in a process that create. I mean, a lot of people looked at Minneapolis's civilian oversight entity and how an officer has X number of complaints against them, and no discipline is any meaningful discipline is ever handed out. And there are a lot of pieces to that. So there are pieces where perhaps an oversight agency doesn't have discipline authority. Actually, most civilian oversight agencies have discipline authority or do not have discipline authority. But some have recommendations, but not have the ability to make recommendations, but not all of them have the ability or the requirement that anybody respond to the recommendations. So there are definitely pieces along the way where you create a trail of accountability. So there's accountability with the oversight entity itself that can't be neglected. There has to be accountability to those that are receiving your recommendations and your thoughts about the dispositions. If, for instance, you have a model where internal affairs or professional standards is doing the investigation, having things like the ability to do audits to make sure that there's fair and consistent policies and discipline being put in place is really important. And it also, that particular piece, making sure that the process is fair, not only benefits community members, it also benefits law enforcement to know that the processes that they fall under are being fairly applied to all of them. So there are some things that make some more effective than others, and I'm hoping that what we can do is talk about a lot of those things so that you can take the most effective practices and apply them to your recommendations so that you can end up with the strongest model possible for your city. I don't think that there's a civilian oversight agency out there that doesn't wish that they could do something or could change something in an ordinance to make them a stronger oversight agency. So what we're constantly looking for is the better model, the better formulation of different authorities and responses to authority and cooperation agreements with law enforcement to really make it an effective model for you. So I feel like I kind of talked around that a little bit, but I hope that was helpful.
No, I think you got it. It just it also sounds like commissions can do all of this work and essentially not be that effective in any recommendation that they might make down the road, or that's a possibility.
Right. There is always the possibility that there will be the moment where they make the wrong call or something falls through the crack. I mean, we have oversight directors who are doing amazing jobs, but they've got a huge caseload and outstanding cases to be investigated, and so that's seen as them being ineffective. So there's a lot of things to be considered. And so what I'm hoping that we can do is to help you consider all of those things that maybe not all cities had the benefit of considering when they were putting things together in the first place.
Thank you. Commissioner Harris, did you want to add?
I believe her microphone isn't working, Chair.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Thank you for the reminder.
I wonder if she can use the chat feature to add her voice.
Yeah. And then Mr. Ramirez, we'll take a brief recess after this item, and if it's possible, if we could try and work on the tech.
Sure. And she, her chat says that she's in agreement and thankful for the information.
Thank you, Commissioner Harris. All right, so Mr. Ramirez, if we can move on to a roll call vote.
Sure. Commissioner Adam Malikan,
Excuse me. I vote yes.
Commissioner Alonso,
Yes.
Commissioner Chavez,
Yes.
Commissioner Escobedo, or Chair Escobedo.
Yes.
Commissioner Harris, you can signify with the thumbs up. Yes, got it. Commissioner Kim Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Rachel Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Killebrew,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Gorman,
Yes.
Commissioner Rodriguez,
Yes.
Commissioner Sander,
Yes.
Commissioner Vice Chair Zepeda,
Yes.
and alternate Louisa Wood, Commissioner Wood.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes, Chair Escobedo.
Thank you. Let's take a break. Everyone can stretch their legs, get up. Let's return at 7:45. We'll take 15 minutes.
Sure.
I think that's our official 4th unanimous vote. So we're on a roll.
Yes.
We're doing well.
You're already gelling together. Good. Enjoy your break.
All right. We'll reconvene at 7:45. Thank you.
Hey, Christian, what screen do you see? Do you see the timeline?
I see the agenda, not the timeline screen. I don't believe.
Oh, that's right, because I paused it. Let's see. Now you're good. You see the timeline? All right. Great.
We'll give it a little bit longer. All right. So we will call the meeting back to order at 7:45. And we have our next item, which is the commission will review and consider a proposed timetable for presenting a recommendation for city council consideration. And I'll give a brief description. This is by no means a final product. It is just a proposed timetable based on comments that were made at our first 2 commission meetings. And basically everything on here is strictly from comments that commissioners have made. And everything on the screen right now, the timetable, what is in each of those time periods, are those even the right time periods? Those are all up for the commission to change if we want. And if, I guess I'll just kind of go through the thought process behind the May-June timeline is more of getting everything in place. And I believe this was Commissioner Rodriguez's kind of idea from last meeting is we need to get everything in place. We need to collect as much information as possible. And then the next is kind of narrowing it down to what are some of the systems that we want to focus more on and getting ready for that outreach and what is the outreach going to look like. So I'll go back to May, June, data and information collection. This is going to be our working groups, the formation of working groups, collecting all the data that we need, looking into all of the different types of oversight bodies, looking at what we're currently doing for hiring, training, and current policies with the Santa Barbara Police Department. The next is presentations from community groups. So there was an idea that we would have community organizations present to the commission, and they would get a portion of our meetings to talk to us about what's important to them as it pertains to civilian oversight. And then selecting a facilitator, so that's what we did today, so we could check that one off the list. And also, if we want part of our public outreach to be sending out a survey to the community, we're also going to have to find a firm that specializes in structuring survey questions, because it takes a particular skill set to structure them so they're not leading and we get the type of information that we want to get out of those. So I heard you loud and clear. For that one, we'll definitely come with a scope of work and a little bit more information on the front end so the commission can see that. The next is we would report back in the second time period in yellow from the original working group. So we would basically get 2 months to do our research, our initial research. Based on all of that information, we would report back to the commission, and we would then figure out, okay, where do we want to focus more of our energy on now that we have just kind of a foundation of knowledge at the very start? Where do we want our new working groups to focus on? We would continue the community groups, having them coming out to meetings. We would likely start focusing on our public outreach strategy. And then this would also be a good time, maybe in that that first meeting in July, revisiting this timeline with NACOL to see, okay, are we on track? Do we want to reconfigure this? What do we actually think is a realistic timeline to meet our goal in March? We would then develop the survey during this period, and October through December would be the public outreach portion, we would have new work groups that would focus more specifically on budget, the selection process, what's the complaint process. Again, all of these things will be revisited as we go through it to make sure that we are on track to meet that March deadline. During that time period, we would also release the survey, and we would, towards the end of that time period, be reviewing our outreach and survey feedback to inform then the final stretch, which is refining the models that we have done more research in, development of ordinance language and or a report. If we want to just send the city council a report based on all of our findings and then they can come up with the ordinance language, or do we want to do that on our end and submit them a proposal for a potential ordinance, or for us possibly charter language. And then the last month would basically be refining and finalizing our recommendation before forwarding it to city council. So again, all of this is up for us to change. It's just a proposal and a starting off point for us to start discussion. Any commissioner yet? Commissioner O'Gorman?
Just because I had trouble connecting when I opened my laptop back up, so I missed the very beginning, sorry. But I was wondering, because it doesn't say on there, who put this together, and was NACOL involved in it? Just because it's pretty detailed, and so.
I personally put this together, Commissioner O'Gorman, and that's from going back and just listening to commissioner comments. So everything on here is from commissioner comments, and in fact, even breaking it down in this manner with these sort of themes was, I believe, Commissioner Rodriguez kind of gave us that idea.
Because that kind of goes to my next part, which I think is really important sooner rather than later. And I had made some comments last time, but I'm going to reinforce that and kind of expand. And that is, I think at the front end, we do need to get a little more foundation from what exists right now for law enforcement, whether that's, I mean, I had suggested having Barney come because he's an expert in some of the programs, but also I think so that we all have a better understanding of the Civil Service Commission, the Fire and Police Commission, and then labor. Just to have that at the front end, just even informationally, I think is vital. You know, there are programs I know just through having worked on some disasters in the county that, and I forget what it's called, but where there is some outreach post after disasters for law enforcement. I forget what it's called, but you know, where the, you know, trying to address some of those issues that sometimes lead to violence. So I want to put that out there more at the front end. And if not, then I just want to understand why not.
No, and that's kind of what I heard from the commission, and kind of the thought behind this as well is that the next 2 months would be really that fact gathering and figuring out much of that foundational information that you were talking about was the idea. And again, if we want to extend that period so that it's not just 2 months and we can make it 3, that's up for on the table as well. Commissioner Adam Lakin.
Just to add to what you were saying, yeah, I think part of that process will also occur when we do our working groups and we're focusing on the models. At some point, we're going to have to compare our models to what currently exists in Santa Barbara to see what options are available and how we can make sure it's, like, as Cami said, well suited to our city. So I think that process will involve our working groups doing some research on our current existing departments and like what the structure is like and how that structure will play into the models we're looking at. So I think that also will occur as we do our working groups, and maybe we can kind of tailor our working groups to that as we go.
Chair Escobedo, if I may offer some at least answers to this. I think we'd be happy, city staff, to go into further detail of what currently exists. There was one question, and it comes to the end of this timeline, I think it came before, if the commission decides to make a recommendation what the body could look like. You know, a commission can be created by ordinance, or it can created by charter. If it's created by charter, that's actually up to the vote of the people. If it's created by ordinance, it's approval through the ordinance committee and city council. The one thing that the commission needs to be aware about is sometimes the power of a certain commission created by an ordinance may overlap in some sense with one created by charter, but they can never usurp that power. So I'll give an example. We have the Civil Service Commission, which is created by the city charters in there. Any employees who face discipline, whether it's a termination, demotion, or termination, that are civil service employees, so all your police officers are civil service employees, can appeal that decision to the Civil Service Commission, the discipline that's imposed. And the commission can overturn the discipline, or can sustain it or modify it in some way. That power can never be taken away from the commission because it's within charter, unless it's amended, and that has to be done by a vote of the citizens put on the ballot. So I just wanted to that was a question I think that came up from Commissioner Rodriguez today, and I think yesterday, in terms of how it could look like. The recommendation could be one created by ordinance. It could be a recommendation of a charter amendment through the ballot. But it's important for the commission, I think that's a good point, to understand the dynamics, the differences between charter commissions versus ones created by ordinance and what's currently in place. And we have currently in place are three things to be aware of in the current system. It's the Civil Service Commission, which we discussed, the Fire and Police Commission, which doesn't review individual misconduct cases. They sit there and make recommendations to the police department. And then the final thing is the internal affairs process, which is very extensive, and probably something that I'm sure the commission would want to hear from in detail from our police department. We also have Lieutenant Hill, who oversees that. So I just wanted to add that because I know that's been a burning question for the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Domas. Other commissioner questions or comments, changes that you would like to see? Commissioner Alonso?
So we talked a lot at the last meeting about outreach, and I think it's a really important component of this work. But seeing the timeline for the outreach taking place during like a heavy holiday season, I'm wondering if we should move that up a little bit in terms of getting more participation.
That's a good comment. Are you thinking, Commissioner Rachel Johnson? Go ahead.
Yeah, just to underscore that, I was actually thinking similarly, but a little bit the opposite, in that I like the fall because of student constituencies. Like, I think we've got a lot of that here, so they might not be around in the summer, but I think, right, both points, we should try to look at time periods where outreach would be just specific to which groups we definitely want to include the voices of.
Yeah, or maybe I agree with that, Commissioner Johnson, and maybe just more coverage for the outreach in general to make sure that we're being as inclusive and making it as accessible as possible.
Yeah, that's a good point. And maybe we can agree on a general timeline right now, or in this meeting, and if not, that's okay. But then get more specific in maybe July on what those dates are, and hopefully, my hope is that by that time we'll have a better idea on can we have in person or not too, and what that looks like. So that might be a good time to reevaluate.
Right. And hear from the committees too. So
will we have guidance from staff on like the possibilities for in-person stuff at a future meeting, or like do we have a timeline on when? Because like all restrictions are lifted June 15th, right? So
we definitely I know you guys mentioned it last time, and we're definitely striving toward trying to get you in person because, you know, I know you can gel better if that's the case. But with a group this big, and I brought it up with Commissioner Escobedo or Chair Escobedo, with a group this big, it's hard to socially distant. But then in addition to that, we stream, or if there's a desire to televise your meetings. Only 2 rooms that the city has are capable of doing that. It's City Hall Council Chambers and the Gephardt Room. So the trade-off is that if you were to have a meeting in person with the appropriate social distancing, that it wouldn't be streamed nor televised. And that's, you know, it's up to the commission to decide if that's the route they want to take. But if we are able to meet in person without the social distance, then the Gephardt Room can accommodate that once those restrictions are lifted. So we're working on it, Commissioner.
And if I may add to the reason why we said, because those 2 rooms wouldn't have the seating capacity. So the cameras are geared towards, you know, whichever commissioner is speaking, that what camera would go on to. But the council chamber has, what, 7 chairs. The Gephardt Room has about 7 or 8. So we have 15 commissioners, 13 and 2 alternates. And so that's where that difficulty arises. We're waiting on guidance further out there in terms of that. You know, League of Cities also publishing stuff for us to, you know, when other cities and commissions and boards are starting to go in public. And we'll look maybe a quasi, maybe it's, you know, 6 live, 6 not. So we're definitely going to put that on an update for a meeting when we hear more information of how we're going to proceed.
And we definitely could accommodate your working groups if that's something that you know, you wanted to use council chambers or the Gephardt Room for some of those working groups to have a smaller group. We definitely could accommodate that sooner rather than later.
That's good news.
I think for clarification, I believe that what Commissioner Alonso was referring to is not so much our meetings, but the outreach meetings. So community meetings in person. We would have a better idea in July and August, mostly in June and July, really, on if we'll be able to have in-person community outreach meetings.
Got it.
Other, yeah, Commissioner Rachel Johnson.
Yeah, I just wanted a couple more things about the timeline so I don't forget to send them to you later. I'm looking at things like the survey, and I kind of feel, again, this is sort of from doing a lot of surveys on college campuses where timing for email responses is really a science and an art. And I'm wondering if I would maybe encourage us trying to do some of the survey work earlier, like maybe September, only because of what Commissioner Alonso mentioned, certainly about the holidays, but also with a survey, if we're gonna learn a lot, which I suspect we will from a community survey, we might want a little bit of a window to leave open the possibility of a secondary survey or a follow-up survey. So to leave room for sort of the survey, some data analysis, and maybe some follow-up before we hit like December holidays. So maybe just the survey piece, at least considering moving it up a little bit.
Very good point. Thank you.
I guess
Commissioner Kim Johnson and then Commissioner O'Gorman.
Yeah, on that point, talking about follow-up for surveys, would definitely want to lean into also having space for focus groups if we want to. Maybe the surveys will yield some information that we want to dig into, so having that space. And then also would love to add a regular cadence of when we'll disseminate external communications to the stakeholders and to the community, to the point earlier about a best practice being continuing letting people know where we are in the process. I think it'd be great to indicate that on the timeline when we should prepare a one-pager or, you know, have some other kind of communication method out externally.
Mm-hmm.
Great idea. Commissioner O'Gorman?
Yeah, I was just going to suggest that for, I guess, for purposes of tonight, maybe keeping this, you know, not having to get too specific in these timelines, because I think that our committees, hopefully some of the subject matter in the committees will provide some of the detail on how we want to, say, outreach, you know, assuming that we can all get together at some point, you know, having some kind of a workshop, you know, where we can break down into different groups for the public, you know, things like that, but that we might not have enough information on right now. So,
yeah, good point. And I am taking notes, so if you have any comments at all, even if it's more specific, please make it so that we can keep it in mind for later.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Rachel Johnson?
Yeah, just to that point then, it's, I guess, technically the next agenda item, but that was something I was thinking about as well with public outreach. We didn't have that as one of our initial 3 working groups, but I don't think it's too early to maybe think about forming that 4th one right off the bat.
Yeah, that thought crossed my mind as well as we were discussing. So just like with this, those are just proposals. We can add and change and decide on the next item as well. So any other kind of comments, questions? This would be a nice thing for us to, if we can get a general timeline to share with City Council to keep them at least involved and they know that we have a plan and we're making progress. So that was the idea behind coming up with something like this. So if anyone has any feedback on changes, I'd love to hear it. And then what the vice chair and myself will do is we'll make those changes and then send it out to everybody and solicit feedback.
Great.
Just really quick, while we have Cami here still, anything like glaringly missing from this timeline that you picked up?
No.
Or that we should consider in future conversation?
So this is the first time I'm seeing it, like some of you. So at first glance, I don't see anything that's missing. I do agree with a lot of the comments. I think that there definitely can be some phases of public outreach and leaving some time for kind of a secondary level of outreach if needed. I think those are 2 really important pieces that can easily be incorporated into this timeline.
Thank you. Any other comments, changes? Commissioner Killebrew and then Commissioner Rodriguez.
Absolutely. So I thank you for putting this together because it's really helps to get us all on the same page. Really appreciate that. As I'm looking at it, I just want to make sure that as we progress with this whole process, that we can still be nimble in terms of moving things around. I just want to make sure that I see nodding heads. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page with that because things will come up. And so I just want to confirm or reconfirm that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think we should revisit just kind of where we're at throughout. And I think Cami kind of mentioned that earlier, that nimbleness is going to be important. And like I said, this is more just generally to keep City Council in the loop on what our general idea is moving forward.
Absolutely. All for over communication like this. It's great.
Commissioner Rodriguez?
I just wanted to thank you, Chair Escobedo, for putting this together. My mind can tend to be analytical and strategically planning things out. So seeing this timeline and color coordinated and the little bulb outs, it's kind of like a visual yummy for me. So I just want to thank you for putting this together.
The colors.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. So are there any last minute comments on changes that you'd like to see? Otherwise, Vice Chair Zepeda and myself will go back and we'll make some edits. We'll send it out to everybody, solicit more feedback, and then hopefully send it to City Council as an update.
Sounds good.
All right. That was quick and easy. Cool. So we'll move on to the next and last item for tonight. And it's figuring out what working groups we want to do. Again, the ones that we had sent out.
Chair, I apologize for interrupting. I think there was a hand raised for public comment. Yes.
Yep, my apologies.
No worries. No worries. It's late. It's late. That's okay.
Okay, just give me 1 second so I can bring up the person, Mr. Green. I'm going to your hand raised. I'm going to unmute you. Give me 1 second.
Thank you very much for noting that there was nothing asked for the public input. I love the chart. That's really great work. My, I guess, initial observation is we're already halfway through May. So really the June meeting is the only time that some of those things could be done. I'm wondering if the police should be invited to talk about their internal process, and maybe as an outside group, Black Lives Matter. They help to get this all started and get the council's attention to the need for this. I think that might be something you all might want to discuss tonight. And the other question, I don't know what sort of hourly rate might be Nicole's typical rate. There's obviously some services that would be done by staff and some by administrative staff and some that would be done by professional staff. How many hours are you going to get for $35,000? And how much of the $35,000 should be apportioned for survey? I penciled out the possibility of $350 an hour, which is a little high, but math-wise, it works out to only 100 hours. So, if each of you took 10 hours, wow, it's all gone. That's all my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green.
Thank you. Any additional comments from commissioners before we move to the next item? Okay, we will move to the last item for tonight, and that is commission working groups. So we will review and provide feedback on what type of working groups that we want to see, and then if possible, select commissioners to be in those working groups. And I know that we had sent a Survey Monkey out, and that was just an initial trying to figure out what the interests are. But obviously, that's only 3 working groups, and we could add plenty more, and we could take some of these off. So the proposed working groups to start were, give me 1 second.
And Chair Escobedo, can you see the screen?
I can.
Survey Monkey link that was sent out to the commission.
I can't see it very well.
Yeah, it's kind of small.
Give me 1 second.
That's better.
Okay, hopefully that's a little bit better. So I want to walk through some of the responses, if I may.
Yeah.
Just so that it's a matter of part of the public record. So we sent out a survey, informal survey, asking what working groups you may be interested in. Commissioner Buxton, his first choice was policy training and hiring practices. Second choice was research and review of each police oversight model. Commissioner Wood, first choice policy training and hiring practices. Second choice data analytics. Commissioner Rachel Johnson, first choice data analytics. Second choice research and review of each police oversight mode. Chair Escobedo, first choice policy training and hiring practices. Second choice data analytics. Commissioner Rodriguez, first choice research and review of each police oversight model. Second choice data analytics. Data analytics wasn't getting a lot of love, I feel.
More love than I can imagine. That's
Commissioner O'Gorman, first choice policy training and hiring practices. Second, research and review of each police oversight model. Commissioner Kim Johnson, first choice research and review of each police oversight model. And second choice police training and hiring practices. Commissioner Alonso, research and review of each police oversight model was his first choice. Second was data analytics. And last, Commissioner Chavez, research and review of each police oversight model as first choice, second choice, data analytics. So I'd like to just quickly share. So there's a, so I'm just kind of documenting which groups were your first choice. But I turn it over to the chair.
Thank you for that, Mr. Ramirez. This is very helpful. And as stated before, these are proposals, and we'll have future working groups as well that I'm sure we'll be able to add to this list quite a bit. So one that I think would be worthwhile adding to that current working group list is the public outreach part that Commissioner Rachel Johnson brought up. I think that's a really good idea.
Can I suggest maybe we add the words community engagement if possible and outreach?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Community engagement.
Yeah, I think that's a good change. Commissioner Rachel Johnson.
Yeah, on that note too, for that working group, I'm thinking of the public comment that we just heard as well. Like I imagine that maybe this working group as well could sort of help think through which community groups we want to have do presentations. I know like that's going to be a really broad one, including the survey and focus groups, but I think if we want some of those presentations soon, that would that also in people's mind fall under the purview of this group?
I'll start. I would say yes. I think that's a really great idea. But if any other commissioners have any comments on that.
What was the question? Just that the committee would work on that? Is that? Okay.
Any suggestions for additional working groups, or do we any of these working groups that we think we should save for later versus doing them now? Commissioner O'Gorman.
Just, I had written some down, and again, I don't know if now or later, or if we do it as a group, but just issues or things that I think need more focus. Some legislative tools. So for instance, advocacy for state laws, like, for example, qualified immunity, things that have a bearing on ultimately doing what I think people want to do. Similarly with county policies that impact city residents, such as detention, diversion, use of force. You're kind of looking at that a bit. And then I just had outreach, which you said, and labor issues and relations. So I don't know, those could, fall in at another time or be overlap. I don't know.
It's good though. If anyone has suggestions for working groups in general or topics that you'd like more research on, now during the meeting is a good time to say it so that it's recorded. We can go back, we can write it down and make sure we follow up with that. Commissioner Rachel Johnson.
Yeah, to that point, I mean, I think back to what Commissioner Killebrew suggested too about making sure we're nimble. I feel like working groups are probably something for the next few meetings at least. I feel like I'd like to revisit, because as we learn more about what we don't know, we might find that there are more than we think of. And also what Commissioner O'Gorman had mentioned earlier was something I was thinking about in terms of hearing more about what already exists here for the city, like those commissions and oversight adjacent bodies that already exist. I think, I imagine my best thoughts seem to come the day after our commission meetings, right? When I've sat with things for a while. And so I think, I know for a fact that sort of hearing those presentations, I'm sure will spark kind of new things about what we might want to research, and also what we're going to pass along to Cami, probably quite a bit of research requests. So yeah, I feel like there are things probably at the next one we might want to kind of think the next few meetings, maybe we talk about specific kinds of working groups at each one, like have that be almost a standing item to kind of check in with.
Commissioner Adamalakan?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think with adding I like that we added the community engagement. I think they can also have an opportunity to maybe partner with the staff to get more details about what exists. So it kind of parallels the oversight that's going on, so we can see what their options are, and then they can maybe present what we currently have, with like the staff's insight into the police department, all that information, so that maybe they can present at meetings like in the upcoming meetings, and we can just kind of like all get that information as a group.
Good point. Did I see Commissioner Alonso? Your hand.
Yes. So as far as like additional working groups, I was thinking at the end of the day, the city council has to approve our recommendations or accept our recommendations, or some of them and not all of them, or I'm not sure you know what the stipulations are on that at the end of the day, but like I would want to know before we present something to the city council, like what individual council members think about like ongoing work, or if there are things that they like can or won't support for whatever reason, so that we have the opportunity to work on that before it goes before the city council. I don't know what any thoughts are on that for like, for lack of a better way to describe it, is like whipping the city council votes like as an ongoing process before, and getting their input on like is any of this that we're considering like dead upon arrival or anything like that.
One of actually, Commissioner Adamalakan, if you want to jump in.
No, yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. But also on the other side of it, I think it's good to just kind of submit what we think is right, regardless, and just see where the chips fall. I do understand it's a great point though, because you don't want to feel like you're wasting your time if they're not going to consider it. But I think what our thought process should be independent of whatever they might feel, and maybe they can change their mind when we explain it. So.
It's a great.
And one thing that's come up in I think it was last meeting or maybe the first meeting, is having periodical updates to council during a council meeting, and that might offer some insight into what their feedback is based on kind of where we're heading, and it might inform some of the decisions we're able to bring back to the commission.
To that point as well, Chair, it might offer us some additional opportunities to educate folks on what it is that we're doing, like Cami was saying before. Sorry, I interrupted you, Commissioner O'Gorman, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just nodding and saying I agree.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, Cami.
Sorry to jump into the conversation. One of the things that I'm thinking of as I'm hearing all of you make your suggestions about the committee is not necessarily about the working groups themselves, but perhaps dedicating time in each group or the general meetings themselves for a learning. So kind of going ahead and up so that you kind of know what those want to learn, and that there's dedicated time, because since they're also.
Jenny, I think you're cutting out a little bit.
Oh, let me, hold on. Sorry about that.
If you could start again, I didn't catch a lot of what you said.
Oh, better now?
Better now.
Okay, sorry about that. Apparently I've been on too long and my earphones have gone out. So one of the things that from listening to your conversation that you might want to consider is having a dedicated learning session at the beginning of each meeting, whether it's a working group or when you've come together. And that way, because there's a lot of things that you're talking about that you want to know more about. And if you can start getting those lined up, then that can inform the information at the next one. And I know we can do, there are definitely some that need to be done there to learn about what oversight mechanisms are already in place and how those work. But then if there are learning sessions that need to happen about, access to information and complaint process or the models, those are things that we can prepare to do short learning sessions so you have a basis of information before you start discussion. So just a suggestion as you're kind of thinking about. And also those learning sessions might give you even more ideas for working groups down the line.
That's a great idea. I love that. Other commissioner comments? Oh, Commissioner Sanders.
Yeah, I really agree with that, Cami. I think I was a little overwhelmed looking at the working groups because I think they almost seem to build on one another rather than each independently operating solo. So the idea of having some sort of shared learning time at each meeting so that we're all I know that each working group will be experts on their own topic, but so that we're all moderately informed of everything that's happening, I think would be really great. So I know for myself that I can make an informed decision. So
Commissioner Rachel Johnson and Commissioner Chavez.
Yeah, that's Commissioner Sandra, that's a great point. I was laughing because I was the only person that selected data analytics as my first choice. But the reality is I actually have no idea what y'all think that means, because I think there's data and analytics pertinent to every single working group and aspect of the project. So I think, yeah, I think if we move forward with kind of selecting working groups, I'd love a little more insight onto that. And probably also switch my first choice to community engagement. But
Commissioner Chavez?
I also think that's a great point, Commissioner Sander. In terms of disseminating information to the entire commission, I know we had asked before, and I think you had mentioned that we're still working with the IT department on getting a way to share information with each other. But I think if we're able to, if we're going to be presenting information at the beginning of each meeting, if that can either be posted on the website so that way the public can view it as well if they would like that, and also if it can be disseminated to the entire commission either before or after, just so we have that as a reference, either while people are presenting that, and that could be either in PowerPoint form or Word document. But I think that would be really helpful to have that, so it's not just each working group that has their own information, that we each get the same information in any way that we can over the digital format.
I just had a comment, Chair Escobedo. I don't know if you saw the comment in the chat feature, but Lieutenant Sean Hill offered any of his expertise as a resource to any of the working groups related to processes internally. Just want to make you aware of that.
Commissioner Admalakian?
Yeah, I think it would be great. I appreciate hearing that. I think it would be great if the community engagement team met with him and kind of just got some baseline information on where that department is, and just as a starting point, and maybe they can present at one of the upcoming meetings. in the same way. I think that is really important, and also the oversight model groups. Like those presentations should just happen like as soon as possible, because that's kind of the basis of everything. So it'll be helpful for everyone if those two pieces can be, put into place as soon as possible.
Absolutely. And then Commissioner Killebrew and then Commissioner Sander.
Absolutely. I would like to be on the community engagement and outreach as well. I'm also thinking maybe there just needs to be a separate working group focused on the baseline. What do we have existing? Because I see that as a lot of work in of itself, but that's just an idea to throw out there.
So that would be, for clarification, that would be looking into things like the Civil Service Commission and Police and Fire Commission and some of those other mechanisms.
Yeah, and how they work together and all that other fun stuff.
Perfect. And then Commissioner Sander.
Thank you. Commissioner Killebrew beat me to it. That was exactly what I was going to say. I wanted to know, and Cami, you mentioned this before, that there's some things that we can marry or integrate, or what we can dispose of and what we can't. I don't know if that's going to be part of the research review of each oversight model, or if that needs to be what is existing kind of group already. And so I don't know how we differentiate that. And yeah, so I agree with Commissioner Killebrew.
Commissioner Rodriguez and then Commissioner Rachel Johnson.
If we're adding baseline or current bodies to consider, I'd like to be on that work group as well as data and analytics. Not community engagement, not that one, but as the separate one, the current bodies to consider, the three bodies that we have.
So it would be a separate working group.
And do you want it titled baseline, or what would you like it named?
We could say current, I don't know.
May I add something, Chair Escobedo? How about current process? Because I think it's
current process.
Four areas that I think the commission would want to know about. It's the police officer bill of rights. That starts the interview process, the rights there. It's the internal affairs process, and then you have the Civil Service Commission. Then you also want to look at another body we have, the Fire and Police Commission. So I see four distinct areas. Two of them are commissions or current bodies, and two of them are like regular processes, internal affairs and police officer bill of rights. So I think current processes is a good term for it.
Thank you for that. And we can, if you have the time and the ability, you could be on more than one of these. The limitation is we cannot have more than 6, and it would actually be good to keep it even lower so that we don't break the Brown Act. And so maybe setting our ceiling at 5 commissioners per working group. Commissioner O'Gorman, Wood, Adamalakin, and then Sanders.
Okay, just and I think this was my first comment on this item, but my thought was in talking about what we have now, because I'm a little confused. We're not going to just have working groups. We're still going to have our meeting as a whole, correct?
Correct, and the working groups would report back to the commission.
Because what I'm thinking, those things that are just factual and in existence now would be something that I think would be valuable for the whole group to hear about sooner rather than later. So for instance, at next month's meeting, maybe, and then everyone knows kind of what exists, and no matter what your committee is.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's kind of what I thought.
Well, a question I have for Mr. Doimus is, could that be staff presentation that discusses what current processes that we have currently rather than a working group. And from there, that might inform whether or not we need to look a little bit deeper.
Absolutely, Chair Escobedo, Lieutenant Hill, and myself adding any other information needed, we are able to do that and provide materials. We were talking about what an IA looks like, what do the notices look like, what do the reports look like, going through that entire thing. So we would be happy to facilitate that through a presentation and then follow it up with the working group asking questions and input, everything else.
So how does the commission feel about initially for our next meeting, maybe doing a staff presentation on that, and then we can revisit the discussion about whether or not we need a working group? Perfect. I'm seeing lots of thumbs up. That's good news.
The official thumb.
Okay. Yeah. I think I had Commissioner Wood, then Admalakin, and then Commissioner Sander.
I would also like to be added to the data and analytics. I live in research and would love to be a part of that working group as well with Commissioners Johnson and Rodriguez.
Commissioner Admalakin.
Yeah, so my point is kind of moot now since we're talking about the current internal process being a presentation. I originally had in mind the community engagement being two pieces, like dealing with the police and then also dealing with the public. So maybe that could be merged together or something. But yeah, I think I agree with the idea of just having like a presentation and then just having the community engagement be a working group.
Okay, and we can always revisit that if next meeting we decide that we need a little bit more.
Okay. I still don't know which, I'm sorry, I'm still thinking, but I'll get to you on that, on which group I want to be in.
Sounds good. Commissioner Sander and then Commissioner Rachel Johnson.
Thank you. Looking at these, I would like to be on the research and review as well as community engagement if possible.
And then Commissioner Rachel Johnson.
Yeah, yeah, and I was just going to ask to be added to community engagement as well.
So I'm going to pause for a second and take a look at these and ask who does not have a current working group, and I think that they should get first dibs on what they want to be a part of. Vice Chair Zepeda.
This is a process. So I would like to be on the community engagement and outreach. And then also, let's go with that one for now.
And then I don't see Commissioner Renaud and then Commissioner Admalakin.
Okay, I'll go. I'll do policy training and hiring practices.
And I'm willing to come off of that one if there's another commissioner that wants to be on that working group. Commissioner Renaud, is there a working group that you'd like to be a part of?
I just put in the chat. Put in the chat
my apologies. Okay, can we add Commissioner Renaud to policy training and hiring practices?
Yeah, but just for the record, that would be 6, Chair.
We can take my name off for now.
Okay, got it.
Thank you. Who doesn't have a working group yet?
I think everyone's on there.
Awesome.
Lester Bucks, I can't remember his name. The other individual who's not here is not on there.
He's on
there.
Oh, he is. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I believe everyone has.
Not reading very clearly. It's late.
I believe everyone has at least one, Chair.
Mr. Ramirez, you can add me to data and analytics. And I
The love
think
for data is growing. So
love data.
since staff is going to do the current internal affairs or current internal process, I think that's no longer a work group, right?
Correct, and we'll revisit that at the next meeting to see if that's something we want to start.
Yeah.
So given the current work groups that we have and what work group everyone is in, how does everyone feel? Give me a thumbs up, a sideways thumbs down. All right. Looks like it's good. And then Mr. Doimus, do we need a motion for this item or does this suffice? And I like the happy face. Thank you.
You could to be safe, since we agendized creating working groups, that we the aforementioned working group is approved by everyone. If you want to do something like that, just to ratify it.
All right. So do we have a motion to approve the working groups and the composition of the working groups?
So moved.
Commissioner Alonso made the motion. Do I have a second?
Seconded.
Commissioner Wood seconded. Any discussion? I believe actually, did we do public comment, Mr. Ramirez, yet?
We did not. Let me see if anybody would like to speak. Is there anyone in the public that would like to speak on this item? If so, please raise your hand in the chat feature. Seeing none, Chair, I will close the public comment. Or you can close.
And so public comment is closed. Another question I have before we move on to the vote is, do we want to have a group point person that will be in charge of kind of scheduling the meeting and coordinating with staff, if staff or myself and the vice chair, for information that you need, if you need a meeting space, or do you want it to just be kind of a group thing that you can figure out later?
Let's figure it out later.
Okay. So with that, if there's no discussion, then we can move on to a roll call vote.
Yeah. Commissioner Adam Malika?
Yes.
Commissioner Alonso?
Yes.
Commissioner Chavez? Chair Escobedo?
Yes.
Commissioner Harris? It's a yes with a thumbs up. Commissioner Kim Johnson?
Yes.
Commissioner Rachel Johnson?
Yes.
Commissioner Kilbrew?
Yes.
Commissioner O'Gorman?
Yes.
Commissioner Rodriguez?
Yes.
Commissioner Sander?
Yes.
Commissioner Vice Chair Zepeda?
Yes.
And Commissioner Wood?
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right. Then we will close that item, and that is our last item for the night. I know it's been a long night, but I appreciate you all. And we got some good work done. So we'll be reaching out with more information and kind of who you can reach out for more information for your working groups and setting up space if you need it. But have a good night, rest up, and we will talk soon.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good
Bye,
night, everyone.
everyone. Good night.
Thank you. Good night. Take care.